then I'm ready to present. Thank you very much. And thank you very much also to the organization for inviting me to present at this conference. And thank you very much to Henk Moot, the previous presenter, Professor Henk Moot, setting the scene for my presentation as well, and also being a former colleague. I really appreciated how he is talking about evaluative frameworks and how journal metrics in general should be used. My name is Ганс Зийлстра. I'm the Research Metrics Product Manager for Scopus, and I am going to tell you something about how CiteScore can help you analyzing and promoting your journal. And it will be a very practical session. Henk Moot, I think, nicely set the scene from a scientific perspective. I will add to the scientific perspective also the practical implications, how you can deal with CiteScore, SNP, SJR, etc. as an editor or as a publisher. And to give you a little overview of what I'm talking about in the next 45 minutes, I guess, is this. I'll start with an introduction to CiteScore and the Scopus Journal homepage's context, and therefore also explaining more in detail what has changed in June 2020 for CiteScore. We changed something in the methodology and why we did that. And last but not least, we will address how Elsevier can help editors and publishers using CiteScore metrics to analyze and promote the journal, and also get authors to submit their papers. And as a little related topic, I put this old map of St. Petersburg up here. Like Henk Moot, I'm also from the Netherlands, based in Amsterdam. And as you may know, in 1703, a lot of Dutch came to St. Petersburg to help the Russians and Tsar Peter to build St. Petersburg. And as you may know from its map, St. Petersburg has a lot of similarities to Amsterdam as well. You can see a lot of canals, and also in the language, especially in the maritime language, you can see the effects of the Dutchmen being in St. Petersburg in the early 18th century. And again, this support is maybe a nice relationship to our presentation as well. And obviously there will be time at the end for questions and discussion. And as Henk Moot already mentioned, it's very important to realize that, and obviously I'm primarily talking about CiteScore, but CiteScore is part of an array of metrics. So you should not just look at CiteScore as an isolated metric that can tell you everything about your journal. No, it should really be used in combination with several other metrics. So let me introduce you to CiteScore, because it's a relatively new metric, and therefore also probably something new for you. CiteScore was introduced as a new journal metric in December 2016 as a transparent alternative to the journal impact factor. And we therefore also hope that CiteScore metrics will be a new standard that help you to measure your journal citation impact. And it's calculated, and I think Henk Moot also referred to that, based on all active publications in Scopus, currently over 25,000 serial titles, which means that they are publications in a series, not just journals, but also book series and serial conference proceedings. And because of this calculation based on Scopus and its transparency, you can verify the calculation. CiteScore is essentially article-based, so it's an article-based metric aggregated to the journal level, and therefore only linked citations are included from publications in Scopus. And that also makes a little difference to the journal impact factor that also includes unlinked citations. CiteScore is based on the principle of 3 C's and the fact that it's free, it's freely available. CiteScore is really made to empower users to make well-informed decisions regarding your journal strategy. And I believe the audience today is really consisting of a lot of editors and publishers, and therefore I zoom in on this journal strategy specifically in this meeting as well. And to address a little bit on these 3 C's, which I will do further in my presentation as well, it stands for comprehensive because it's based on Scopus, a very broad and comprehensive database, but it's also available for twice as many journals, for example, as there are with journals with an impact factor. But it's also current. As you may know, next to the CiteScore, there's a CiteScore tracker, which is updated on a monthly basis, which will give you a current indication of what your next annual value may be, and therefore also may have some predictive value. And it's also available for new serials, more than, for example, any of the other journal metrics. And it's clear, and that's the 3rd C. It's transparent in its numerator and its denominator. It's not just showing you a number, as some of the other indicators may do. It's also really showing how that number was calculated. It shows you on Scopus, in the numerator, the number of citations, and in the denominator, it shows you the documents it's based on. And even more transparent is the fact that you can click through on the individual articles involved. And as I mentioned, the metrics are available in the free layer of Scopus. Scopus as such is a paid-for database, like the Web of Science, like other databases, but the metrics are in the free layer. And just to visualize what the difference, for example, would be if you compare the last annual CiteScore 2019 with the journal impact factor, you see that there are over 13,000 titles with a CiteScore, but no journal impact factor. And it's not just, let's say, the lower quality journals that are with a CiteScore only. It's also journals that are sometimes very highly ranked. And what needs to be stressed, and because obviously there is a link between Scopus and Elsevier, the system itself is publisher agnostic. It's really not an Elsevier metric. It is a metric that is and can be used by all publishers and all editors and authors. And you see that also in practice. It's already displayed on most journal homepages of the large publishers, including Taylor & Francis, Elsevier, as I mentioned, but also Oxford University Press, MDPI, Hindawi, Emerald, Sage. I think later today there's a presentation by Pensoft. They also display CiteScore on their journal homepages. And you can do it as well. So I will address that in a few minutes. And Scopus itself is a source-neutral abstract and citation database curated by independent subject matter experts. And I believe also one of these subject matter experts is presenting at this conference. Scopus contains publications from over 7,000 publishers. So not just the big ones, as I mentioned in the first bullet, but also many small publishers. But before these publications are accepted to Scopus, they are judged by the independent Scopus Content Selection and Advisory Board. I have all kinds of links, as you may see in this presentation. These slides are available, so if you are interested, at the end, I will show you my email address, and maybe the organization is willing to share this presentation as well. And what is also important that it's not just these international group of scientists and researchers and librarians who represent the major scientific disciplines within this board. Also, their policy is transparent. It's available online, and it's really showing what the content policy and selection criteria are, but also the re-evaluation. You can imagine that if a journal has a lot of self-citations, that may be, depending on the field and depending on the situation, that may be a reason for re-evaluation, and then a journal can either be withdrawn from Scopus, or it will simply stay because there is a good reason for the self-citation. And as you may also know, Scopus works with multiple local boards, and that is really with the goal to further advance the overall standards, but also the quality of journals published in non-English speaking countries, with local boards in China, Russia, Korea, etc. Let me address these aspects of CiteScore a bit more in detail. And the 3 C's and 3. It's easy to remember, and therefore it's always good to have these little bridges to your memory. It's comprehensive, as I mentioned, based on Scopus, available for all serial titles, not just journals, and it can also be calculated, but that's something you should do yourself, for example, for portfolios you define. The clearness clearly is this transparency. You can easily calculate the CiteScore yourself with the underlying data, and they are available if you have access to Scopus. And its currency, and the fact that CiteScore is current, is not only shown by the fact that CiteScore Tracker is updated monthly, it's also the fact that new titles will have Seismometrics mostly a year after they are published. And that's obviously a first indication of their citation impact. But I think for a lot of journals, especially new and open access journals in many cases, it's an important element to be visible to the outside world. And one of the elements to be visible is really to have a first indication of citation impact. And the fact that it's free is displayed here. It's available via scopus.com/sources as an overview, but also for specific pages, we have the so-called Scopus source page, on which we display many different elements of the journal. And again, you can easily display them on your own web page as well via an API or a widget or even a spreadsheet that we make available. Some additional benefits of CiteScore I'd like to address here. We really think that it makes a fairer comparison between journals. We do focus on typically peer-reviewed articles. I will say a bit more in a minute about this. And therefore also exclude the influence of new non-peer-reviewed article types. And it's robust. It's a real stable assessment of journals, and not only the older articles get more time to accrue their citation impact, also younger journals are included because of a longer citation window than before and compared to other metrics. And again, this early citation impact is especially important for newer journals, although you have to be aware that it can also be a bit more fluctuating in the first couple of years of a journal existing. So how do the old methodology of CiteScore compare to the current impact factor? And after this, I will show you the new methodology we started to introduced last year. So if you look at this, the current impact factor, it's clearly 1 year of citations in the numerator to all publications, whereas it refers to publications only from the 2 previous years, basically only articles and reviews, which in that way gives an extra bonus to those publications who have a lot of citations in, let's say, non-peer-reviewed article types like editorials, letters, etc. If you then look at what was the CiteScore methodology at the start in 2016, it was relatively similar, but the main difference was that it was including all publication types and therefore mainly had a larger denominator. And the effect of the larger denominator is obviously also that in general, CiteScores in the old methodology had lower values as such, but were based on a 3-year window. So what has changed last year, last June, with the introduction of the new CiteScore methodology, which was directly applied also retroactively to 2011. And again, it was not just a internal thought, it was really based on customer and industry feedback, both on the methodology itself and its numerosity and recency elements. So what we did, and that was after a lot of feedback and conversations with experts in the field, we adjusted according to these following points. We adjusted the methodology to only really focus on typically peer-reviewed article types. And these are articles, reviews, conference papers, data papers, and book chapters. We also started to include a somewhat longer citation window, 4 years instead of 1 year. And we included, and that is point 3, publications in the most recent year as well, therefore enabling a so-called symmetrical approach. And as you may have seen in the previous slide, that is really an asymmetrical approach, which was really based on an historical element in the past that big computers were not available. You really had to count many of these things manually, where there is not really a reason anymore to use this asymmetrical approach. A symmetrical approach in that way seems to have quite a lot of advantages. And it's similar, for example, to what you see on an article level for the field-weighted citation impact that has a similar symmetrical approach as well. And what is also important is that we should realize that whatever metrics you are looking at, they should not give the impression that they are super precise. So it's really important to also show that you are aware of the fact that you should reduce false precision, which is also an element mentioned in the Leiden Manifesto. And what may be also relevant nowadays is the fact that as of this new methodology we introduced last year, no articles in press are included. Articles in press are also known as so-called early access articles. And we clearly do not include them in the calculation to assure a level playing field. The reason for that is that out of these 7,000 publishers, only a small number of publishers, maybe around 20, 25, can really deliver these data. And if you do include them in the calculation, then you will have only a short-term effect of giving them a benefit, but all of the other publishers and publications will not have that benefit, and that is obviously not a level playing field. When we introduced this new methodology, we were obviously interested in feedback from the experts, from people in the field, and we were obviously monitoring social media, and one of the reactions we got was from Ludo Waldman, who is one of the directors at CWTS in Leiden, the institute where Professor Henk Moot was also working earlier in his career. And he really agreed with most of the improvements and said that the element of including a more recent year was something to be aware of and should really be carefully considered. Also, editors for Scopus are really important, and Elsevier editors are relatively easily accessed via our network. And the feedback we got from one of the editors of the European Journal of Operational Research was that they were really enthusiastic about this broader citation and publication window, as well as originally already the CiteScore tracker, which is monitoring the number and types of citations on a regular basis. So just to summarize this new methodology in one visual, this is how it looks like in the current approach for CiteScore. And you can directly see that this is a symmetrical approach. It's looking at citations from 4 years and also similarly to the publications in these same number of years, and again, really related to peer-reviewed article types. And how does that look like on Scopus itself? Scopus, as I mentioned, has so-called Scopus source pages per journal, and those source pages consist of the so-called CiteScore metrics primarily, and that has 8 elements in itself. So it really consists of 8 metrics. As you can see on the left-hand side, there is the annual CiteScore value. CiteScore 2019 is currently the most recent annual value. And as I mentioned in the chat, on the 3rd of June, the CiteScore 2020 will be released also together with SNP and SJR updates. And it's simply the preparation for that, also with the communications around that, that it's a bit slower than the release of SJR you have seen. But rest with me, the data are there and will be next week available. Another element you can see here on the right-hand side is CiteScore Tracker. And that is something that is updated monthly, as you know. The third one is more to the bottom, is the so-called percentile, which helps you in benchmarking. A percentile of 99 implies that the journal is in the top 1% of its category. And to the left, you see the category ranking itself as well, number 2 out of 529 publications. And we also have so-called quartiles, but that's actually in a next tab of this source page. I don't have a live demo, so I work with these screenshots. One of these next tabs you see on the right, that is the so-called CiteScore Rank and Trend tab, that includes both the ranking out of the number available within the group, but also a small visualization. And if you then look, for example, a bit more in detail in these category overviews, you will see both the quartile information, which you see on the left, and it's one of the filters, and on the right, you also see the so-called percentage cited within the journal, which implies what percentage of articles does have at least one citation. And basically within Scopus, you can compare as an editor or a publisher having access to Scopus up to 10 sources with CiteScore metrics. So CiteScore itself obviously can be compared to different journals. You can make a selection of journals based on a certain search on, for example, in this case, computational biology, but obviously you can apply all kinds of different selection criteria. And then you can click through to either a visualization of CiteScores per year, SJRs, SNP, percentage of review articles by year, etc., etc. So these CiteScore metrics really come with additional options. They are available for 2019 back to 2011. And again, as I mentioned via the chat, on the 3rd of June 2021, which is next week, CiteScore 2020 will be released, including the new CiteScore tracker for next year. So that's already the start of an indication for what your next year CiteScore may be. We have the historical data with rank, but also visualizations, and you can export the data as a CSV format for further analysis, for example. There's a free widget available. There's a spreadsheet I have available for you, but probably a Scopus API will be most sophisticated for displaying these CiteScore metrics, and it will always automatically update as well. And obviously on Scopus, you can further filter for options for open access, for document types, years of publication, etc. And as my previous presenter, Henk Moed, already mentioned, SNP is also part of this suite of metrics. We do display SNP and SJR on these Scopus source pages, freely available for each journal. And I don't think I need to explain SNP in detail anymore, but it's good to be aware that Professor Henk Moed developed this SNP himself. And therefore, this is a really, I think, interesting and strong additional metric to the CiteScore metrics. And again, it's this element of array of metrics that should play an important role of assessing your journal quality. SJR, as well as SNP, have been developed and are calculated by what I would say external parties. SNP is calculated and developed by CWTS in Leiden University, and the SJR is calculated at the University of Granada by the SciMargo group, for I think Henk is also working. And what may be important in the broader context of these metrics is also the alignment, and in this case, the alignment Elsevier has made with two very important so-called manifestatements. And these manifestos, are basically the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics and the so-called DORA, the Declaration of the Declaration on Research Assessment, which is often mentioned in all kinds of discussions you may have seen. And as you see the feedback here from Stephen Curry, one of the lead people in DORA, that is obviously appreciated because that adds to the transparency, not only of CiteScore metrics and Scopus, but Elsevier as a publisher as well. So just to show you how these elements of these manifestatements have been included in, for example, CiteScore. And this is what you see already if you are on the Scopus CiteScore source page. We do update methodology if it's really necessary. It's not something that will happen many times, but basically all the journal metrics, you know, over time have seen adjustments. It's SNP and SJR, and even the journal impact factor is changing, as you may have heard in the news. What you also see, it's important to be very transparent about the methodology. On the second point, Leiden Manifesto point 4, keep data collection and analytical processes open, transparent, and simple. And it allows you in the middle to also verify the data and do your own analysis. And as you may see in the value on the left bottom of this page, 12.5 clearly indicates that we avoid misplaced concreteness and avoid false precision. And again, also Leiden Manifesto point 9, if you want to look at the details, leidenmanifesto.org online has all the details. So now over a bit more to what I would say use cases, and especially the use of metrics in the broader assessment of science, and at what stage of the publishing process what different metrics could be important and which are relevant. This is an overview we deliver in one of our educational materials online at Scopus. It's available obviously in the context of metrics. And what you see here is 5 steps in the publishing process, or in the research process, better to say. And it starts with deciding where to publish. And obviously there, CiteScore plays an important role next to the potential other journal metrics you may like to apply. And in the 4th step, which is applying and reporting back to funders, you could also consider using journal metrics, of which CiteScore is one. But again, it's a broader array of metrics, which should include, for example, also usage and alt metrics. Alt metrics, I won't talk about them in detail. You can ask some questions about alt metrics in the end if you like, because I'm also one of the co-organizers of the annual Altmetrics conference. So how does this help you authors identify where to submit a paper? And again, especially if you're an editor in the audience or a publisher, I think this may be of specific interest. And I give an example here of what you see on Elsevier journal homepages, and that clearly expresses what is important to researchers. It's about impact, it's about speed, and it's about reach. And those are really the more metrical elements of science, but it's also about reputation. And part of that could be read from the aims and scope of a journal, which is in this case available on the journal insights pages on elsevier.com, one of the systems I developed about 8 years ago when I was still in publishing. But it's also important to have the more qualitative aspects of metrics. So never forget to suggest peers to colleagues for advice. And for example, use the textual elements of your publication as well. There are journal recommenders available. They give you, on the basis of an abstract that you drop into a field on a website, all kinds of suggestions based on in the interpretation of text, basically, artificial intelligence. They give you all kinds of suggestions, including metrics. So it's both based on text and on metrics. And it will give you these indications of impact, speed, and reach. Elsevier has a journal finder. Springer Nature has a journal suggester. And Wiley, for example, also has a journal finder. And the reason why all these publishers have different, let's say, tools for it is basically that next to these overall available metrics like CiteScore, they add information about more soft details like the aims and scope, like downloads. And for example, Elsevier also displays the countries from which the leading authors are coming, as well as the editors of the journal, also on a world map. And supporting your journal authors in using these journal metrics, CiteScore metrics are not just a helpful addition to what you could call a teaching toolkit, and because of its 3 C's and 3, but it's also addressing the fact that researchers are time poor. They need to spend their time, their limited time on research and study, and have less time learning about the complexities of many different journal indicators. And I think CiteScore is relatively simple and straightforward to understand for everybody. We have Russian language information available for our metrics as well. There's a Russian Elsevier site specifically talking about CiteScore. You can see the URL here, elsevierscience.ru. But we also have all kinds of educational material available, like fact sheets, infographics, and other instructional material, as well as what we call the Scopus Toolkit for Training, which includes an updated LibGuide, a librarian guide basically, which has metrics as a specific section. And on top of that, the world is more and more visual. We have a video tutorial that explains the CiteScore metrics in a dedicated module. And if you are working with researchers that really like to dive in deep into the Scopus data, there is an option to have the full platform details available without any charge, but that really is based on a so-called proposal that needs to be submitted to the ICSR lab, the overarching organization that also helped us creating the new CiteScore methodology. And if you look at the metrics from a journal strategy perspective, and again, I expect a lot of editors and publishers in this meeting, these are the elements that would help you to address your use case. And let me just address one use case here and not mention everything on this slide. If you, for example, really need the very latest impact measure, including your competitors on a monthly basis, it would be wise to look at a CiteScore tracker, because that not only gives the impression of the development of your own journal, but potentially also of your competitors that you can select on Scopus or the spreadsheet available. And I've been part of many editorial board meetings when I was in publishing myself, and this is something that could be really straightforward and simple, and to be shared during an editorial board meeting is just a spreadsheet of numbers that give an indication of the citation impact of the journal. Not only the numbers themselves, but also related to its different categories it's represented in. And you can clearly see on this page that it's looking at 3 years of CiteScore, specifically for the European Journal for Operational Research. And obviously you can play much more with these types of spreadsheets. And using these metrics is also really depending on your preferences. Every metric has different characteristics and therefore helps you to answer different questions. And this table, and again, I won't mention all the details, gives you an indication for what measures you would preferably use one of the metrics available on the so-called Scopus source pages. And if you, for example, look for a size normalized metric, you could use most of the metrics, but for a subject field normalized metric, you should really focus on SNP, SJR, or just the CiteScore percentile. From a promotional perspective, and that is also, I think, one of the roles an editor and a publisher may have. Again, we offer these free options to display these metrics on your website, and it's coming together with SNP and SJR, and you can display them via the Scopus API, the widget, or a spreadsheet available on scopus.com/sources. This is an example of another way of promoting your journal, and this example is taken from Elsevier. What they do when the CiteScore new values are released, they email their editors, they email their previous authors, and give them the news of the new CiteScore values within the context of a category for these authors who are potentially interested in submitting again to this journal for their next paper. And again, that is one way of promoting your journal with the use of a metric like CiteScore. And you can obviously use your social media as well, right? Depending on the country where you live and depending on the social media you use, you can copy paste parts of the Scopus source pages and mention them on your social media channel. And obviously we have all kinds of visuals available for you next to the textual elements you can obviously enter yourself. So coming to an end and coming to a summary, this is what I'd like to share with you. So the CiteScore methodology has now been adjusted to include typically peer-reviewed publications. It's displaying only one decimal value, therefore reducing false precision, and it's having a longer citation window, 4 years instead of 1 year. We are including publications in the most recent year as well. Therefore, the publication window for documents is also 4 years, which makes it a so-called symmetrical approach for the calculation of CiteScore. And we do not include early access articles or so-called articles in press in the calculation of CiteScore, therefore assuring a level playing field between all publications, all journals from all publishers. And an easy way to simply remember the benefits of CiteScore metrics are the 3 C's in free: comprehensive, current, clear, and free, which obviously come with additional options. And as Henk Moot in the previous presentation also clearly stated, use relevant metrics to answer your research questions, both in your journal strategy and in your author and researcher education. Use them really responsibly. Use qualitative next to quantitative input, and always use more than one research metric for your assessment. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I have more slides, but those are just additional appendix slides, as I call them, in case they are relevant for questions. So I would say the floor is open to questions, and I see there is a number 3 in the chat. I'm not sure if I can read them. I think I have to also go into my translation mode, because if the question is in Russian, I may not be able to read it. So let me stop sharing my slides for a minute and start the interpretation. Over to you. I don't hear something. Is that right?
Sorry.
Yeah, there you are again. Thank you.
It was a wonderful presentation, and I wonder if there are any questions in the audience. While we're waiting, there are some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they.
Maybe you would like to answer. Do you see the question?
Yeah, I see the question. Yeah, I see one question in English, and I think the other one's in Cyrillic Russian, so that's difficult for me to read. But let me at least try. Yeah, there's one in English, so I will address the one in English. So what criteria are? So my question concerns subject categories. It's a question from Irina Tivavieva from Moscow City University. Her question is about subject categories. What criteria are used for differentiation? For instance, what I find confusing is cases like languages and linguistics coexisting with categories like linguistics and languages. Yeah, I agree. If that exists, that may be confusing. I must admit, as a metric expert focusing on journal metrics, I am not fully aware of all the details, how the board determines what the different subject categories are. But obviously, there is space for feedback on this. I can imagine that over time, not only categories develop, and more you see the existence and appearance of multidisciplinary categories. So over time, you see Scopus adding categories and sometimes even changing categories. In this specific case, what I would suggest is taking this to the Scopus board and reassess if this is still a valid categorization, or that maybe one of these categories is already out of date. Again, I cannot directly address this on the spot because I don't have the background of it, but I suggest to bring it up to the board. There's another question. Sometimes people say Scopus quartile. What should we understand behind these quartiles of CiteScore, SNP, or SJR? Very good question. As Henk Moot in the previous presentation was referring to, those were SNP quartiles. What is primarily mentioned on the CiteScore Scopus source pages on Scopus is a CiteScore quartile and a CiteScore percentile. So basically a Scopus quartile is those percentiles being 75 and higher. So 75 up until 99 consists of the Scopus first quartile, and the lower quartile is the fourth quartile. And again, that may be different from what SJR seems to be doing sometimes, as also Henk Moot in the previous presentation was mentioning. So Scopus quartile is a CiteScore quartile on Scopus. Any other question?
Hans, can you please also clarify what is the difference between CiteScore and CiteScore trade?
Yeah, well, basically there's no difference in calculation. It's basically simply the difference between the years they're covering. CiteScore 2020, the one which is released on the 3rd of June, really covers the most recent 4 calendar years, so 2020, 2019, 2018, and 2017, whereas CiteScore Tracker is including the last 3 years of that sequence, but also including this year, and therefore looking forward to next year. So the difference is it doesn't include the oldest year of the previous annual value, but it starts including documents and citations of this year, and therefore is really current, I think, but also more volatile. So what happens if you look at CiteScore Tracker as a prediction for your next annual value? You better look at it more specifically towards the end of the metric year, which is in May. So I would suggest to look at it from, let's say, February, March of the new year, and then the CiteScore Tracker really has a great predictive value for the annual value, because by then about 95% of all citations have been accrued and included in Scopus, and also between 95 and 100% of the documents, which is the denominator of the metric, will by then be included. So actually, if you would have looked at your CiteScore Tracker last month, which is the April CiteScore Tracker, that was more or less the CiteScore value you can expect to see as an annual value be released on the 3rd of June. I hope that is a clear and comprehensive answer.
Yes, thank you very much. So I believe we can close this session. Уважаемые коллеги, это был Ганс Зийлстра, и он, соответственно, один из сотрудников Elsevier, который занимается непосредственно разработкой и ведением CiteScore в Scopus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hans. Большое спасибо всем.
Yes, and just as a last remark, if I may, if people are interested in the slides, again, they are available. Just contact me, and otherwise the organization will have my contact details for further discussion and feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое.
Have a good conference for the rest of the day.